Okay, we got to bring it back together here. I hope that was a good exercise just to read out God's word together. If you've been with us, we just don't have the bandwidth and the time to go verse by verse through Proverbs. Oftentimes you read one or two lines and you could go like an hour. But before we jump in, I want to point out one thing, because all the way back at the intro to Proverbs, I think it might have been the second week, we talked about different types of Proverbs and how sometimes Proverbs, I can't remember the terminology that's correct, but basically sometimes a proverb will give you Proverb A, and then you'll read it, and then you'll read the very next proverb, Proverb B, and then you'll say, like, wait a second, they're like in conflict with one another. So which one is true and which one is not? And usually what is going on is Proverbs is inviting you to see them not as two different proverbs, but as one, and you're kind of seeing two different angles of something. And we got one today. We're not going to look at it, but I want to just draw your attention to it so you can see what I'm talking about. It's verse 20 and 21. It says, "The poor is disliked even by his neighbor, but the rich has many friends." So if we just stop there, what is kind of the meat and potatoes of what it's saying? Do people want to hang out with the poor people? Not really. That's kind of what it says. Who do they want to hang out with? The rich. The rich. They have many friends. Is that wise? No. Then how did it make it in Proverbs, right? And you could get caught up in saying, like, there's this little number 20, and I got to figure out what verse 20 means, without looking at verse 21 and realizing that verse 21 is actually the commentary to verse 21. So verse 20 is an observation about humans. That left to their own devices, do humans want to hang out in the alley with the homeless guy, or do they want to get invited to a giant mansion on the beach? Okay, that's human nature. We could all admit that deep down that would probably be our human nature. Verse 21 says this, though: "Whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner." Ooh, so what is it saying? The human inclination to say, like, I would rather push the poor away and go hang out with the rich is actually, what's the commentary on that? That's actually sinful. And just because you have that in common with all humankind doesn't mean that somehow that's a good value to hold. It goes on and says, "But blessed is he who is generous to the poor." You see how he tied in the generosity? What is required to be generous? That you have some means or you have some resources. Blessed is the one who has access to the rich and yet still sees the poor as equal and worthy. If you flip over to verse 32, this is actually kind of a little tag along. I'm sorry, not 32, it's 31. "Whoever oppresses the poor man insults his maker." I was reading this week and it said verse 31 is kind of revolutionary, because what it's saying to the ancient world is that in a world of pagan gods that literally don't care about the poor, that the reason they're poor is because the gods hate them, the Hebrew Bible says the poor are made in the image of the maker. And you are defined by whose image you're made in. So whether you're rich or poor is irrelevant. It's whose image and likeness are you made in. But he who is generous to the needy honors him. It's a repetition in the same Proverb 14 of the exact same thing. It's kind of an interesting way. Okay, we're going to jump in. I told you at the very beginning I had read this proverb and I love it. This is Proverbs 14:4. Let's jump in and talk about some of these. This is going to be 14:4, 14 and 23. And I just kind of put a heading on there that says, "Sacrificing the present for the future." How many of you sacrifice the present for the future? How many of you go to work? Going to work is sacrificing the present for the sake of the future, kind of in maybe a smaller. How many of you set money aside or have done something to plan for your child growing up one day? Yeah, so we do this all the time. This is actually tied into a concept called delaying gratification. We've talked about this before. Modern kind of social sciences tell us delaying gratification actually is the number one marker in children for future success as adults. So what does it mean? That children who are able to say, hey, I would rather forego having one cookie now For 2 cookies later, actually this personality type becomes adults who say, you know what, I'm willing to say, I'm going to step aside and say, I don't need to jump into the hedonism and all the pleasure right this moment because I'm working for something greater down the road. And this is the topic. So here we go, verse 4. Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of the ox. Anybody want to take a stab at verse 4? Let's just, what's that?
It's worth it to have a dirty manger to get all those abundant crops.
Okay, it's worth it. So dirty manger, I'm going to just put a star next to it, is worth it. And why is a dirty manger worth it? Because you have oxen. Okay, oxen are important because I looked up oxen. I can't think of a nastier animal, maybe pigs. But what's the deal with oxen? They're big, they're powerful, they're a beast of burden. What comes with a big beast? A lot of poop. In fact, I was looking at some ancient Hebrew rabbis' commentary on what they thought. And I almost spit my drink out at my computer screen because it literally said something you're not supposed to say in English. Bull, that is what you put up with for the sake of a great harvest. So I told Ricardo beforehand, I looked up, what is the sacrifice of time for somebody who has beasts of burden as part of their life cycle? I was looking up 1800s, I don't know, what does a farmer take to have 8 horses? And I got anything from an extra 45 minutes to 3 hours a day worth of labor. And what is the labor? You got to clean it. If you don't, you're inviting all pests of all kinds, mice and disease. So you got to clean it. And what do we mean by cleaning it? Scooping poop. My 5-year-old is the only kid on planet Earth who likes to do this because, don't tell anyone, his grandpa scoops it and throws it over the fence into the nature area. So he thinks it's pretty cool that he gets to throw stuff over the fence. So he's always asking, can I scoop the poop? So maybe we should get an oxen and see how that changes. But okay, so you got to scoop it. You got to feed them. And feed doesn't just magically appear. You don't just go to the grocery store in the ancient world and say, I need some ox feed. So what do you got to do? You got to grow it or you got to pay for it. So it's a cost. You got to have water. Right? You have to tend to it. So this is hard work. So what is kind of the principle of the proverb? Are you willing to accept annoyances and put up with stuff in the short term because you know the long term is worth it? So what does it say? Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean. How many of you are saying, you know what, it would be really nice if I could have no oxen and an abundant harvest? How many of you know that that is, as a biblical principle, not a possibility? Yeah. So the idea is sometimes we put up with a lot of that in the short term because it's worthwhile in the long term. Now, each one of us is created differently. We have different experiences that have kind of exposed us to different hardships. How many of you know, we don't have to say any names, that sometimes there's people who are not willing to put up with any hardship whatsoever? How many of you know those people generally are not very difficult until they complain about that their outcome is not good? Do you know what I mean? It's the, I'm not willing to work hard in the present, but I want all the benefits of the future. Proverbs tells us the principle is we are willing to accept annoyances and hardships to a degree because the end result is worth it. This is delaying gratification 101. Verse 14 says this, the backslider in heart will be filled with the fruit of his ways, and a good man will be filled with the fruit of his ways. Interesting. Very straightforward. So what do they each have in common? You will get what you deserve, okay? I don't usually like this word deserve too much because I think in Christian theology, sometimes when we get caught up in what we deserve, we forget that we all deserve death. Yeah. death and destruction. But I think this is talking about just kind of the street smarts. We use the word street smarts. I would say street smarts is how our culture actually tries to say wisdom. It's applied knowledge. You get what you deserve is a tough word. But the idea is what you put in is what you get out. So let's read it again. The backslider in heart. I looked up this word because I thought, man, this is one of those Christian terms that's loaded with meaning. Everybody has said it or heard it. Oh, that person's a backslider. And every time I hear a word like that, I immediately think I should probably know what the word actually means before we just say it. So this is a really fun word because it sounds like it should be a word in English, but it's not. It sounds like what my 1.5-year-old might say as he points at something. Sug. You can practice saying it. This is how you say it in Hebrew. This is how you say backslider in Hebrew. Sug. It's actually not a noun, it's a verb, which is interesting, and they have nounified it. So they say the backslider in heart. This is what it means. It means to move away from something, to turn back. It's literally the word that means like if you're in a hallway and someone's walking towards you, you're the one who's like, oh, get out of the way. That's kind of what it means. Or it can mean, at its core, the root word means that you flinch a lot, which is interesting, that you flinch. And I was thinking about this idea of flinching. How many of you are sports fans? Anybody like baseball still? I do. I'm a Giants fan. I don't know if you knew that. Giants are looking pretty average this year, but they're going to win again soon. I'll tell you about that after. But there's something that happens if you watch baseball. It happens multiple times in a game if you just watch a broadcast. It's the announcer or the person commenting will make note of a guy that's like, dude, you got to swing the bat. The pitch is coming and what do they say? You can't hit the ball if you don't swing the bat. So I was thinking like this is what it is, that opportunities are presenting themselves and you just flinch or you shirk away or I'll do it later. It's all of that kind of wrapped up into one. So the backslider in heart is recognizing that there are opportunities for your heart to grow. Maybe your heart had grown, but now all of a sudden you're just kind of pushing those aside. Maybe you're growing lazy. Maybe you're literally like falling into sin. The idea is you're not allowing your heart to continue to pursue God, and so it's pulling away from God. And what is the fruit of that type of heart? Lost opportunity in the short term, and Chet, you said it, over the long term, it's destruction, right? That God gives us opportunities to serve, to love, to be served, to do acts of service, all these sorts of things. And a backslider is constantly flinching like, not for me, not this time, I have plans, over and over and over, and over time, you miss out on the life that God intended for you on earth, and you miss out on the eternal life that God has for you. But a good man will be filled with the fruit of his ways. So the outcome, the output depends on the input. That's what it means. So let's just talk really quickly. What do we use as inputs that Jesus has called us to? Prayer? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, prayer. Scripture, service, worship, evangelism. How about this? How about just something simple? How about just like a good quality time with a good Christian friend? We could say fellowship. When I think fellowship, I think like the gathered body that are together. What about just like, let's just go get coffee and laugh and talk about each other's families? Is God honored in that? Yes. Yeah, we're called into that. That's a good input. That's like my soul, my heart has a deep desire to connect with friends, and I have good ones at my disposal, and I use them, and man, it's uplifting to me. That is a great input to have. All of these things over time, what is the output of this? The Bible actually uses a word. Yeah, holiness. Our lives begin to look like Jesus. You're like fist pumping like you've never got an answer right. You're like the smartest guy I know. In fact, when I need answers, I go to you, so don't fist pump. So I might ask you what other things mean. Okay. So you will have the output of what you've chosen to input. Sometimes I think we don't have a choice on some of the inputs, do we? Sometimes we have just things at work, because guess what? We just read another proverb. This is sometimes you just got to put up with some things because you recognize the long-term blessing is worth putting up with it in the short term. We could have an in-depth conversation. I don't know that that means that those are inputs. Sometimes there's external things pressing on you that you just say, you know what, I'm not going to let them into me, but I do recognize that I can't get out of them. The idea would be like jumping into a pool. You're not going to get the water off of you, but you could choose not to breathe the water in, right? Okay, the last proverb in this section is this. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. I think this we kind of have a proverb in English for this, verse 23. We say that talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. Again, anybody watch any baseball highlights in the last couple days? This is like teed up, pun intended, for us. I was watching a highlight that was going viral. I think it was the Milwaukee Brewers versus the Rays. Did anyone see this? The pitcher threw the ball, hit the batter. The batter looked at him and said, you did that on purpose. The pitcher said, you want to just talk or you want to dance? And he was like, let's do it. So tossed it. It was like, talk is cheap. You could stand there and talk all day, or you could come out here and let's do this. And it was a great brawl. It was. If you like sports fights, it was a good one. Talk is cheap, right? I'm just kidding. Proverbs says that we should always veer away from violence, not towards the violent man. Surprised you didn't correct me. So talk is cheap. This is what our verse says. In all toil there is profit. So let's talk about toil. What does toil mean? Work. Now let's talk about, what does work mean? We talked about this last week. Does work mean your job? Yes, but not exclusively. Does it mean your parenting? Yeah, but not exclusively. Does it mean the ability to be a good friend? Yeah. It means all of those things, the things that you are putting in your effort, the energy. You have limited resource called energy. It's all the stuff you're putting into for a blessing to be brought out of. Your friendships, your work, all of these things. In all toil, in all the things you expend energy in, when done in the wise way of Proverbs, there is profit. I was looking up this word because I wanted to know. Sometimes we see the word profit, and what's the first thing we think of? Money. That's not what it means. It means abundance, gain, or plenty. It's often used to describe a harvest. It's used to describe in all toil. So you're out there in the field just walking the rows. Maybe you're picking dead leaves, small little dead leaves off some of the crops. Maybe you're adding water to some places. Every little thing you do adds to the abundance of the profit. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We'll do our first group question. It's kind of based on this phrase. Many of you have heard it. It's in your outline. It says this: when you do what you love, you will never work a day in your life. How many of you have heard that before? How many of you not love it, but you love the sentiment of it? I have to tell you, YouTube has made this like such a temptation, because you get on there and it's like everything that I like to watch is like, I was working in a cubicle for 40 years, and then I turned my wood shop into a business. Now I make $1 million a year on YouTube. You should do it too. And I'm like, I didn't know that was an option. I don't even know how to work with wood, but I think I'm going to go for it. Okay, so when you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. This quote is commonly used to encourage young people to follow their dreams and to attempt to turn their passions and their hobbies into a career path. I think everyone's laughter is a giveaway that, like, yeah, there's some sentiment of like, yeah, you should have a passion, but like maybe pump the brakes a little bit, right? Your passion for underwater synchronized swimming is probably not going to yield life-giving things that your life will need, right? Okay, so in light of our discussion, especially about the oxen, how do you think the wisdom of Proverbs would respond to this quote? So what would Proverbs say to that quote? And then in your own life, how do you draw the line? Like, where do you tilt the scales of saying, I'm willing to put up with X amount of annoyance and difficulty and hardship for the sake of the long-term harvest versus, yeah, that's just too much. I got boundaries and I'm going to move on from this. Everybody clear? Okay, we'll take 6 or 7 more minutes, and then we'll reconvene, and we will. I'll pick just 2 people. So if you hear something along the way in your discussion that you feel like, man, that's helpful for the group, just write it down or be ready, and we'll pass the mic and share when that time comes. Okay, let's talk about toil and all related things. Would somebody be willing just to be the microphone runner? Awesome. Thank you, Breck. Would somebody like to just contribute something that stood out? It could be something you said, maybe something you heard someone at your table say, something that struck you in this discussion. Come on, make Breck work.
Yeah, no toil here.
One of the things I commented on was, at the start, was about assigning of the value of the thing you're doing. So I use the example of, as a parent, cleaning up diarrhea diapers and the kid getting sick in the middle of the night. And there's no way that that is fun, but yet it's because it's of such high value, we're willing to do those things. So it isn't like it's not work, but the value is greater than the toil, so that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. It's like in the service of love to another person, you start to slide the scale of what you're willing to put up with. To his credit, I pushed back on Steve and said, so if a friend called you up and said, hey, I have diarrhea and I'm puking, can you help me? He said, if they came to the point where they had to call me, then I would. And I was like, man, one day I'll get there. Sorry, who's this? Anyone else? Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Nobody else? That's okay. Matt wants to share. Just talk loud.
Oh, okay. Well, wait, there we go. I don't know if this applies because I didn't really share this with the table, but I was thinking it. Something that I feel like I've been feeling a lot lately, learning, I don't know if I've been learning it, but like when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Like I kind of do that, but I've been feeling burned out on it. So it's like what was my passion turned into a career, but now it's like I have no desire to do it as a hobby outside of when I'm doing it for work. And so I feel like if I had gone into another career path, I could still be doing it and loving it. So I don't know if I can think of a better example of delayed gratification than that. Because if I'd gone into another career, been making more money off of that, I could still be doing what I love and not feeling burned out on it. So I don't know if that's a good example, but I was sitting here thinking that and I didn't share it. So,
you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot in here is like, how would you describe this principle to a younger person? Because that's really what Proverbs is all about, right? It's set up right from the beginning, a father teaching their son. I feel like what you just said is like modern wisdom to a modern proverb. So like, do what you love. You'll never work a day in your life until it feels like worse than work that you ever thought it would be, and now you're burned out. Like there's some element in there of like, beware of buying these cultural things that promise you happiness and satisfaction, because even the thing that you think is your greatest passion can become empty and void for you. Yeah. Anybody else? Awesome. Okay. Well, we are going to move on. The next section I just kind of brought together and was looking through, and I call this one the quiet contemplation of wisdom. And we've been talking a lot about some of the characteristics of wise people. The last few weeks, a lot of our discussion has been around how wise people use their words, how they use them to glorify God. Usually their word economy is less than most people. We talked about that last week. Like, wise people usually hold their tongue. We talked about, like, we got 2 ears for listening, 2 eyes for seeing, 2 nostrils for smelling, but God only gave you 1 mouth. And then what was the quote? He put teeth in front of it to guard it, right? All the physical cues to say, like, hey, be careful what comes out of there. So we're going to talk about some other things about wisdom, and that's kind of the quiet contemplation of discernment. So this is what verse 7 says. Leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not meet words of knowledge. What does that mean? It means a fool is not a viable place to find knowledge, right? It means when it's time to write your research paper, a library is probably a better place to go than to the local pub and pull up a bar stool, order a beer, and listen to what all the wisdom is there, right? That there are levels to this, and it says this. If you're reading the book of Proverbs in the ancient world, and the reason you're reading it is because you're pursuing wisdom, here's a rule of thumb for you. Don't hang out in the presence of fools. Why? They got nothing to offer you by way of wisdom. That's what it means. The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way. This is what I think of. I think of a prudent person pauses a lot, contemplates the consequences and the possible blessings of every major decision in your life. I'm not saying that you should slam on the brakes on the freeway and then say, like, God, should I get off at this exit or the next one? That's dangerous. I'm saying in your life decisions, God, what do you want for my child? How do these decisions affect my child? How I have anger inside of me towards this child who won't listen to me. Instead of lashing out, let's pause and contemplate and discern what is the best path forward for me and this child that I raise them up in the way that they should go. But the folly of fools is deceiving. So let's erase this. So I think this is interesting. And I think this is on display at all times throughout all of history, but right now it's very easy because we have the internet. So what does it mean that the folly of fools is deceiving? It means that foolish people, the fools, who are practicing foolishness, see their foolishness not as foolishness, but as wisdom. Isn't that interesting? That the enemy of your soul would take something idiotic and dumb and foolish and turn it and make somebody believe that what I'm doing is actually the good thing. You're the one in the wrong. I'm actually being good. Can you think of any other verses that speak to this? In those days, they will call good evil and evil good, or the opposite, yeah. Anybody want to maybe discern and choose wisely a current example of this happening? Did you have enough time to discern wisely, Linda? Okay, go ahead.
I think so.
Okay, well, we will do it collectively.
The protesting right now at the university.
Okay. Yeah. I think there's so many levels, right? No matter like politically where you're at, just the idea of some of the bare bones things going on is like, didn't think that through. Or you hear somebody put a microphone, what do you think? And somebody says something that's so non-coherent, it's like, I don't even think you know why you're here. Agree or disagree, you don't even know why you're here. You're just here because everyone's here, yeah. We'll move on, verse 9. Fools mock at the guilt offering. I want to talk about this guilt offering. What is a guilt offering, by the way? It's also called something else. Sin offering. Okay, so in the Old Testament, what is a guilt or sin offering? It's for two things. It's for doing a wrong against God or wrong against your neighbor. Okay? And you recognize it. I have broken the law. If you want to look this up, just kind of cross-reference Leviticus 5 and 6. I know you love Leviticus cross-references. So it's prescribed for doing something wrong against God's law and against your fellow man. And so what is the law? I have I got mad at Cretia. I saw her ox walking in the field, so I shoved it in a ditch. Is this a sin? Yes. I go home. She got what she deserved, but then I slept on it, and I can't believe I did that. Ugh. So what does Leviticus say? I'm going to replace your ox, and I'm going to offer a sacrifice for the forgiveness of my sin. Okay, now when you do that, what does the Bible say about your sin? It is now, it's forgiven, it's clean. The slate is clean. I've made it right with you. I've made it right with God. Fools mock at the guilt offering, but the upright enjoy acceptance. What is it saying? The upright are willing to do what? Recognize their own guilt and sin. And as they recognize their own guilt and sin, what do? They enjoy. It brings them into joy that God is willing to forgive. Right? We can't fully understand the beauty of God's forgiveness when we're not willing to repent of our sin. So what does it say that the fool does? Mocks at the guilt offering. What does it mean to mock at it? Ridicule it. Why do I need that? It's not my problem. When you do that, what do? You take your own future in your own hands, and the Bible is very clear this is not the ground that you want to stand on. I just quoted a commentary I read. It said, to despise the guilt offering would be to have disdain for taking responsibility for one's own faults, whether against God or another, while the upright are left thanking God and enjoying the acceptance of the offering and the covering God has made over their sin. Very simple. That a sign of wisdom is someone who's willing to say, my bad, that was my fault, and I'm willing to call it what it is. It is called sin. I sinned against you. I apologize. I want to make it right with you and ask forgiveness from God. And then I'm going to be relieved and have joy that God actually accepts it. Verse 12, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is in the way of death. What does that mean? Are you always good at discerning? Has anybody ever picked like a fork in the road moment and thought like, I think this is the best way to go? And then you get down that path and you realize, red alert, wrong choice. Anybody ever done that before? Anybody ever done that, recognized it, and kept walking that path for a while? And then walked that path for a while longer? I imagine that all of you sitting in this room, no matter how long you went down that path, you at some point made a U-turn, right? But if you didn't make a U-turn and you just continued down that path, where would it lead to? Destruction and death, right? That's what it's saying. So it says, sometimes you go down a path that seems right to you, but it actually leads towards death. So sometimes your human instinct to jump into something, even with a good heart, you get on the wrong path. That happens to people. So I think the wisdom of Proverbs is, hey, look, sometimes you're going to find yourself on a path that you think is good, and it actually is not. But the wisdom of Proverbs is greater than just that. It's that you could actually reverse course, get back on the right path, ask for forgiveness, and guess what? Clean. God has forgiven you. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. I think this is speaking to something that we sometimes get a kick out of, and maybe we should reconsider. It's a G word, anybody? Gullibility. So what does it actually say? Sorry, I have like the verse on one side and then my notes on the other. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. Gullibility. How many of you would say you are a gullible person? Okay, so I think in the recognition and the self-awareness of that, you now have the power and wisdom of Proverbs. That you can recognize that, hey, I am prone to being gullible, to believing things that aren't true, and so maybe some of the other wisdom of Proverbs is a good thing to plug in here, that I would have better discernment. How many of you, probably a long time ago, not now, of course, sometimes enjoy pulling a fast one on a gullible person? How many years ago? I know that's not fully applicable, but sometimes it is sort of fun to try to convince your own child of something, or just let them run with like an explanation. This is not totally gullible, but you guys will like this. John Bush, you all know John Bush? John Bush is amazing. But he has a couple times over the years, because he gets, occasionally he gets some access through his work with ABC, access to Disneyland. And so from an early age, Colton called him Disney John. So he was very concerned and upset when he found out that wasn't actually his name. But then not that long ago, we found out that he actually believed something else, which we never told him, but we just decided we're not correcting it. It's that he thinks John Bush wakes up every day and goes to Disneyland, and that's his job, to just go to Disneyland. So we were driving in the car the other day, and he was like, Dad, I wonder how Disney John's day is going today at Disneyland. I said, what? He said, he works by going to Disneyland, and I just went, he's probably having a great time. No, I got to correct it. I probably shouldn't bring laughter and humor to this, because this is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I think gullibility is a twofold thing. Number one, it's the self-awareness that I might be a gullible person. Maybe you're not gullible like in your area of expertise. Like I can sniff out lies in these subjects, but then I don't know that much over here, and I just trust anything anyone says. The opposite could be, I'm somebody who likes to prey on the gullible at their expense. And I think the Bible is saying two things. It's saying that the simple in mind should not just allow themselves to continue down the path of gullibility all the time and depend on others, but maybe they need to start flexing the discernment muscle. The prudent gives thought to his steps. Again, it's the idea of every step is, what is the wise way to go? I think the wise person, this is based on everything we've read so far through half of Proverbs, pauses to think, prays often, is willing to do the hard work of investigation, is willing to consult, is willing to respond to exaggerated claims with skepticism. Even when they're all alone, they're willing to say, I don't think I believe that, and just because 99 out of 100 people do doesn't mean I'm just going to buy it. So here's the thought about contemplating wisdom. I wanted to touch on one kind of phenomenon in our culture that I think can maybe really throw us for a loop, which is a pun, and I'm about to tell you about it. It is something that people have termed a feedback loop. And I think, based on observation, this could be something that we fall prey to, and we get sucked into it, we get spit out, and we think that maybe we are wise, when in fact we might be the opposite. So let me tell you what I mean. How many of you know what a feedback loop is? A feedback loop is oftentimes, you know that screech that happens in a microphone? In fact, it would probably happen if I turn this way and turn this on. What's literally happening is the microphone is projecting out of the speakers, but if I stood in front of the speaker, that means the sound coming out of the speakers goes into the microphone, and before you know it, it just starts going, you know that sound? That's the feedback loop, and it speeds up so fast that the sound waves just can blow out your speakers if you're not careful. And so it just goes over and over and over. So what is a feedback loop for us? Let me paint a picture for you that I didn't come up with. I'm just stealing from lots of people. How many of you are on Facebook? Facebook? Book face, you know? We've moved on to Instagram. It's 2024, but many people are still on Facebook. Okay, Facebook. So a lot of research has been done. It turns out that the average person on Facebook, it doesn't really matter how many friends you have. Let's just say you have 100, just for a round number. That roughly 80 to 90% of your friends on there have very similar ideology, religious belief. These are your friends for a reason. You know? The reason they're your friends is because you guys share a lot in common. Is that a good thing? Yeah, it's great to connect. Okay, now let's just say there's a contentious social issue going on. I'm not going to pick one because I don't want to go there right now. You can use your imagination. Okay, so 90% of all your friends, they all kind of agree and think exactly the same, right? Okay, so one of your friends posts an article that's pretty heated and debated. If you stepped back and said, I wonder what the country thinks about issue X. And issue X is like a 50-50 down the middle. People disagree. They have arguments that are intelligent, unintelligent, all of the above. But when you post it to your Facebook timeline, how many people agree with you? It's a trick question because almost always 100% agree with you. Because the people who don't agree with you, what do? They just don't participate, right? So you post an article and what starts happening? You get thumbs up, likes, shares, amen, yes, 100% this. Anyone who disagrees is an idiot, done, share. And it starts to do what inside of you? I must be right. All I'm getting is positive reactions. I must be right. So it emboldens you to post it again or post similar things. You see how this feedback loop happens? And what it does is it begins to psychologically tell you that I am right and I am justified in this anger or this position. Now, I'm not saying that you're not. I'm just saying that what this does is it prevents you from ever hearing any other point of view, and it ends with you demeaning or even like dehumanizing people who might disagree with you. And then the last kicker is when you find someone who disagrees with you, you are convinced that any smart, intelligent person would agree with me, therefore you must be a moron. Right? You see how this works? And it becomes a feedback loop where we actually are not training the muscles to say, you know what, as followers of Jesus, we are people who bear hope and light into the world. And even if I disagree with something else in this article that I posted, I am committed to it. I'm committed to it in a way that has charity and kindness and generosity that's willing to engage people that might disagree. Instead, what we get is we get kind of vitriol and anger. Does that make sense? And I think that sometimes the output of this is that we feel like we have landed on wisdom. And I think to the nth degree what we have landed on is foolishness. Because we are not people who are being formed to say, you know what, I disagree with that, but I want to hear why you think that. Oh, you know what? I disagree with 90% of what you just said, but you did say something I never thought of. Can you explain that to me a little bit more? Oh, I've never heard of that author. I'm curious, so like, what else do they, and it becomes a dialogue where people get to see Jesus in you instead of seeing grenades being launched through the internet. Does that make sense? Okay. So here is the question for you. How do we ensure that we don't become endless feedback loops who are, unbeknownst to ourselves, walling off viable voices of wisdom and knowledge in our own lives? So how do we know that we haven't done that? We haven't just cut off like people we should listen to and consider what they have to say. And then the second part is, how would you differentiate the human need to consult an expert in a field? So I'm just looking for knowledge in this situation, and it's kind of irrelevant if you're a Christian or not. I just need your expertise versus pursuing real spiritual discernment. This is an issue I need wisdom in. So in your own personal life, how do you know when it's time to say, I just need like expertise versus I need wisdom? Does that make sense? Okay, let's take 5 or 6 minutes and then we'll wrap up for the night from there. I think just for the sake of time, we won't pass the microphone, but I hope that this is where we're landing on the how do we know when we're just seeking knowledge versus wisdom, and I think sometimes the answer is that we don't. And that's what Proverbs is all about. It's that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that we said this all the way at the beginning. I always hold up my Bible when I think of this. If it hits the fan and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Where's that Bible of mine? That will have the answer. That is not a good strategy. But those who are like, every day, I don't 100% know what this means, but I'm committed that this is God's word of truth. and I'm going to build my life on it. Sometimes I don't understand, but I'm going to obey anyways. I don't understand this. Can somebody help me? Wow, I really had a fruitful time this morning, and it impacts a lot. And I'm praying, and I'm going to church, and I'm worshiping. All of those things, I feel like when it hits the fan, our ears are tuned to hear the voice of God in a way that can speak even when lots of other people are yelling and throwing stuff into the center. It's very noisy. We said this last week. We almost never have this quiet, peaceful time where God can whisper and we can hear it. The world is so noisy. If we don't know the tone of God's voice over all the other voices, then we're going to be in a heap of trouble. And the only way we do that is by tuning our ear to hear it. And we do that every single day, fine-tuning. This is how God speaks to me. That's God's voice above the noise. I can hear that. And I think it's the discernment piece. Verse 26 and 32. I just wrote a now and future refuge. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence. You can underline that word, confidence. And his children will have refuge. The wicked is overthrown through his evil doing, but the righteous finds refuge in death. The idea of confidence is a security and where you put your security. Where do you know that you can retreat to that is safe and comfortable? I think it was a guest speaker here. His name is Corby Dukes. Do you guys remember Corby? He's an issue when he comes here, just so you know, because he walks the whole length of the stage, and everyone who does lights and camera is like, can he just stand still for a second? He's like all the way over here off camera, and people are on YouTube. Can you tell him to stand still? I can't see him anymore. But he said something once that I thought was amazing. He said that harbors, do you remember this? Harbors are built to keep boats safe, but boats are not built to stay in the harbor. It's very important that when you get in a boat and you go out to sea, even for a long distance, that you know where the nearest harbor is if you need one, right? But the boat's not made to stay there. It's made to pop in, maybe receive service, maybe weather out a storm, but it's not meant to be there. Where is the harbor you go back to? The fear of the Lord, it says, is where you have confidence. Even the righteous will find harbor in their death. Even death. They will find harbor in God. So why don't we just take the last 5 or 6 minutes? In fact, this is what we'll do. I'll come up in about 5-6 minutes to tell you, hey, this is a good exit ramp. Why don't you take on this final question together, and then I'll come up and let you know the time is ending, and then why don't we end together by praying around the table. I would encourage you just to share a prayer request if you have one. If you don't need to make one up, but maybe assign someone to pray over your table or a couple people. So the question is, where are the common places our world advises us to take to place our confidence in times of trouble? So if you just follow the wisdom, in quotes, of the world, where is the world saying you should put your security? Which of these areas are your greatest temptation? And then how do you resist that urge and remember to pursue the Lord and put your security in him? JT is going to have a good answer because he's already laughing and ready to rock. So why don't we do that, and then I'll be up in about 6 minutes. I want to be respectful of your time. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and we'll wrap up. I'll pray over you. If you have time to linger, you're always welcome to. Thrice. I'm just reading your shirt, Matt. Let me pray over you, and if you'd like to hang out, if you'd like to socialize or continue your conversation, please do. There's no rush out, but let me just pray over you. God, thank you that your word is wisdom when it's applied to our real life. And God, we want to just have the discernment we need to do exactly that. So God, would you remind us that the expectation is not to exit Bible study and be perfect, wise Christians, but we're works in progress, and your grace is sufficient for us. But God, you also require effort out of us, that there's blessing in toil, there's profit in toil, and we want to toil well. We want to toil in the right direction and for the right thing. So I pray that in the moments of our connection with you, our just moments of devotion, reading, or praying together, or attending a church service, I pray that you would shape our hearts and minds to hear your voice, to know what is fruitful and what is not. I pray for the conviction of your Holy Spirit to lead us away from things that are maybe a waste of time or maybe a boundary that needs to be set. And God, I pray that we would continue to do it together, that iron would sharpen iron. So go before us. Thank you for Proverbs 14. Thank you for so many things that we observe to be true in the world. And we realize that it's true because you are the author and perfecter of all things. And so God, thank you that we have access to those things through your word. We love you. We ask that you would go before us. Amen.